You start off on your new habit feeling motivated. Maybe it's exercising, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's waking up early, maybe it's working on that goal that you've been putting off. And for a couple of days or even a couple of weeks, it works. Then one day you miss it. You fall off the wagon. You don't stick to your routine. And that day turns into a week, and that week turns into a month. And then eventually you're asking yourself the same painful question that you've asked yourself hundreds of times before. Why can everyone else stick to habits except me? And every failed attempt chips away more and more at your level of self-confidence, and it becomes harder to trust yourself and harder to believe that you'll actually follow through. Until eventually, you stop seeing habit failure as something that you do and instead start seeing it as a reflection of who you are as a person. And you start seeing yourself as lazy, undisciplined, and unreliable. But what if the real problem isn't that you're unreliable or bad at sticking to habits? What if the real problem is that you've been trying to force yourself to fit to productivity systems that were never designed to fit with how you're naturally wired to work? You see, one of the things that most people get wrong is that they tend to have a one-size-fits-all kind of idea about what productivity looks like. And this idea of what productivity looks like doesn't work for every single person. And every single person is very different in terms of what types of habits and routines are actually going to work very well for them. But because we tend to collectively have a very shallow understanding of what productivity can actually look like, what ends up happening is that when somebody's natural motivational style, their natural motivational rhythm doesn't fit to that ideal, they start to see their own natural motivational style as a problem to be overcome, as a bug and not as a feature. And when it's the case that we try to fit to ideals of what productivity looks like that doesn't match who we are as a person, a deeper and wiser part of ourself will reject it because it doesn't fit who we are authentically. But when we have such a narrow idea of what productivity looks like, we can just come to the conclusion that, oh, I'm bad at sticking to habits, or oh my gosh, I'm just so lazy. And this often impacts us on the level of identity, where we stop trusting ourselves to actually follow through on things, so that when we try a new habit, we already come into it like defeated because we've already failed to stick to so many habits before in the past. And it's very similar to that Einstein quote, "Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, that fish is going to believe its whole entire life that it is stupid." And this erosion of identity is something that I've run across a lot of times working with people who are trying to establish habits and who are dealing with things like self-sabotage and procrastination. But most of the time, if you're struggling to stick to habits, it's because a deeper, wiser part of you knows that that habit isn't really going to align very well with who you are as a person. And not all productivity habits will fit for all people. For example, somebody who's really time-oriented with their productivity and who really does well with time-based structures might do really well with the Pomodoro technique. But someone who's very task-oriented when it comes to productivity will do terribly with the Pomodoro technique because it tries to put in time bounds what actually should come about more intuitively based off of the task at hand. So to give an analogy, let's say that you have two different superheroes. So let's say that you have the Flash, who can go really, really fast, and then you have Aquaman, who is able to withstand the very strong pressures of the ocean. And so these are two very, very different superpowers. And so let's say that if Aquaman believed that he had to be like the Flash in order to have a superpower, and he was like, okay, no, I need to learn how to go super fast. What's going to happen is that that's going to be out of his zone of genius. That's going to be outside of his natural motivational rhythm, and he's likely going to struggle with that. Or let's say in this superhero world that they exist in, maybe it was thought that invisibility is the ultimate superpower, where it's like it's really the only one. And so really, their superpowers weren't even looked at as superpowers. Going super fast, not valuable at all. Being able to withstand the pressures of the ocean, not valuable at all. And so then the Flash and Aquaman would all be trying to overcome their own superpowers to try to become like the Invisible Man. And of course, that isn't going to work for them because they're seeing a feature of their superpower, of their own way of operating as a bug and not as a feature. And so many times I have worked with clients who have a superpower when it comes to motivation, but they see it as a bug and they try to overcome it and they try to fix it and they try to match up to an ideal of what productivity is supposed to look like. And that ideal of what productivity is supposed to look like is something that they've absorbed from the wider culture. And in the wider culture, productivity often looks like wake up early, get up at 5 a.m., have an extensive morning routine, schedule out every component of your day, make sure that you're in on top of things all the time, have everything super structured. And that way of operating does work for some people. But for other people, they're going to struggle. It's going to be like trying to bend their elbow in the opposite direction. And that way of operating isn't the only superpower. It isn't the only way to be productive. And even the way that we think of habits creates this problem. The idea of a habit is that you just repeat it enough times and then it'll just get ingrained. You do it 60 times or you do it 100 times and then it's just going to be second nature. But luckily, your being is wiser than that. It is not going to let you set a habit that fundamentally operates out of alignment with who you are as a person. So it doesn't matter if you repeat a habit 10 times, 60 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. You will not let yourself set a habit that is fundamentally misaligned with who you are. And that's because there are deeper, wiser parts of yourself that know what's authentic to you and know what's not. And if you try to operate in a way that isn't aligned with your natural motivational rhythm, that part of you will reject those habits. So if you've tried to install the same habits over and over and over again, only to have it not work and just fall off the wagon, it's probably that deeper, wiser part of you at work rejecting what fundamentally doesn't fit with you. And what you want to do is you want to use all of those failed attempts and all of those rejected habits as information about how your natural motivational rhythm actually operates. You want to think about yourself a bit like a surfer looking to surf your own ocean. And so the ocean is like your bottom-up sort of rhythm of motivation. It's how you naturally operate. It's your energy levels. It's your instincts. It's what just naturally comes forth from you. And there is so much motivational power in that bottom-up way of operating. But then when you try to install habits, it's a more top-down way of operating. So you're coming up with a habit or a routine and you're trying to install it. And oftentimes people will think that the motivation comes from the routine or comes from the habit. But that top-down habit is just a potential way of channeling that natural bottom-up motivation. Similar to the metaphor of the surfer in the ocean, all of the power is there in the ocean. The surfer can only just move their board around to try to fit the natural currents of that ocean. And so when you're trying to apply a top-down channel for that bottom-up motivation to be channeled through, what you're going to do is you're going to try out a lot of different top-down channels to see what works with your natural motivational rhythm. And so instead of continuously trying the same top-down motivational style over and over again and then saying, oh no, I failed, there must be just a problem with me where I can't be motivated or I'm just lazy or I'm just unreliable. Instead, every top-down system you apply, every top-down habit or motivation or routine, you want to think about it as a prototype channel for that bottom-up motivation. And in the same way that an inventor might have many, many prototypes that they try and fail before something succeeds, you want to think about it the same way when it comes to the habits and routines that you're trying to install. And you want to think about it as each time you try and fail, you learn more and more about what does work by eliminating what doesn't work. And so you apply prototype number 1, and prototype number 1 is immediately rejected. Okay, prototype number 1 doesn't work. Let's try prototype number 2. Okay, that gets rejected. Okay, let's try prototype number 3. And every single failure that you have actually tells you more and more about how to succeed. So if you've failed 1,000 times to set down a particular habit or a particular routine, you have learned an incredible amount about what doesn't work, and now you can understand what does work. But the trick is not seeing those failures as an indication that you can't trust yourself to succeed. Instead, seeing it like the Wright brothers would be seeing, like trying out a new prototype of airplane. So it's like, okay, prototype number 1 didn't work, now prototype number 2. And it was that mindset shift that totally shifted things around for me. For a long time, I would try to establish habits and I would just fall off the wagon and I would just lose so much trust in myself because it's like, oh my gosh, I've tried to establish a habit 100 times. But then when I saw it as every time I was getting slightly more refined, slightly more dialed in, slightly more understanding about what is it that's actually going to work for me and that's going to enable me to motivate myself with ease, that's when I started to look at myself in a different light. I'm not just somebody that just fails to set routines. I'm somebody who needs a very specific kind of routine to actually channel that bottom-up motivation. And the reality is that habits and routines should always come easily to you, because that's the whole point of them, is ease. So if they don't come easily to you and they don't come naturally to you, that's a strong indication that those habits and routines don't fit with who you are and they don't fit with your natural motivational style. But that doesn't say anything about who you are as a person, or how reliable or how motivated you are, or how lazy you are. Instead, it's just information about how well the prototype works. And if that prototype doesn't work for you, there's always other things to try. Now, if all of this is resonating with you so far and you want to learn more about how to stay consistently motivated, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself, and the link is down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to work with me, I also have an application down below in the description box. So in my own journey, I failed so many times before I actually found a motivational system that will work with my natural style. So a couple of things about me is that I'm a very intuitive worker. So any kind of structure at all that isn't imposed by another person, I am going to reject entirely. If I try to put myself in some kind of a structure that's really time bound, I'm going to rebel from it every single time. And also, I'm a naturally very, very slow worker and just a slow person altogether. And oftentimes people would just get really, really upset with me when I would go so slow, because a lot of the things that I was required to do in my younger years required speed. And so I heard so many times in my youth that being slow was such a problem of mine, and it was a flaw that I needed to overcome, and I really related to it as a flaw. And so because I had taken this in, and because I had this very narrow idea of what productivity and motivation looked like, I tried to operate like a type A person. I tried to operate like a hyper-structured person who had a very set down schedule. And I tried to work in a very speedy kind of way. And every time I tried to do that, I would fall off the wagon. But really what was happening there is that I was totally rebelling against it, because it does not fit who I am as a person. It doesn't fit my natural motivational style. And so the way that I was thinking about motivation and productivity was almost like a sprinter who could get things done within a timely manner. But instead of being like the sprinter, my way of operating, my natural motivational style and working style, is more like a fermentation process. So I work very slow and very messy, and there aren't a lot of hard lines in what I do. And it's very important that I'm very task oriented, because then I can just be really slow, really focused on the task, and really focused on digesting it fully. And that's the type of animal that I am. That's my superpower. If I try to overcome my slowness because I see it as a flaw, because the world tells me it's a flaw, what ends up happening is I end up trying to throw out the gold of my personality. And because so many people would get so angry at me for moving so slowly, or that it would be a problem, I oftentimes related to my slowness as a problem, or my messiness as a problem. But that's exactly the type of thing that makes me great at the thing that I do. And that's the nature of human specialization. We all operate in different ways. And that's the thing that makes the world go around. And ultimately, all of those times where I was falling off the wagon and not able to stick to my habits and routines that operated against that fermentation process that is my natural motivational style, that part of me was serving me so well then. But I just saw it as a reflection of, oh, I'm just so lazy, or I have these flaws that I'm just not overcoming. And so it requires a lot of wisdom and a lot of discernment to recognize what's a flaw to be overcome and what's actually just part of the furniture of your personality. And then deciding to lean into those natural strengths that you have that you might see as weaknesses. And in my time as a coach working with entrepreneurs and ambitious creatives, oftentimes people will try to throw out their secret sauce. They will try to throw away the very thing that makes them the most motivated and the most powerful in their craft. For example, I once worked with an entrepreneur, and his natural motivational style, which he didn't see it as this at the time, but his natural motivational style was whenever he would get really, really interested in something, he would be absolutely obsessed with it, and he would get really, really, really into it. And then once he got really into it, he could actually incorporate those things into his routine. And so he was either really, really into something in a task-oriented way, or he was just very routine-oriented. Like, okay, this is just part of my day and this is what I do. And so he could be very motivated towards the things that were in his routine, and he could be very, very motivated towards the things that he was very, very interested in. But then there was this middle ground of things that he had never been interested in before, never been quite obsessed with in the way that would cause him to really commit and really focus, but also not something that he could apply to his routine because it hadn't gone through that cycle of obsession that's necessary to help him incorporate it into his routine. And when he first started working with me, it was something that he wanted to overcome. He wanted to be able to motivate himself a different way and to create a different way of operating. But instead of that, instead of trying to overcome his natural motivational style, I recommended that he lean into that. And instead of trying to motivate himself to do the things that he felt medium about that weren't yet ready to be incorporated into his routine, instead I recommend that he find something really, really interesting about the things that are existing there in the middle ground. And so it was a matter of finding the angles through which he could get really, really into those middle ground things so that he could eventually incorporate them into his routine. And once he started to realize that this way of operating wasn't a bug but was a feature of his personality, he was then able to wield it far more accurately. To give an analogy, it's like imagine if you had a screwdriver and you thought it was supposed to operate like a hammer and it just wasn't operating like a hammer, but then you realize it's a screwdriver and you just lean into the fact that it's a screwdriver and now you can use it that way. And now it's a highly effective screwdriver as opposed to a very ineffective hammer. And so in both my case and my client's case, we both started off believing that the features of our natural motivational styles were bugs that needed to be overcome. And then we both eventually came to the realization that the real power comes in leaning into those features and being able to see what those features can actually do when you actually start treating a hammer like a hammer and a screwdriver like a screwdriver. Now, with all of the times that you've failed and fallen off with habits, you've probably learned a lot about your natural motivational rhythm. And so you'll want to start making a list of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And really the best way to learn this is through trial and error, trying a habit, falling off with it, trying a slightly different habit, falling off with it, trying another habit, falling off with it. That is honestly the best way to learn. But I'm going to give you a few questions that you can ask yourself in order to fast track your understanding of your natural motivational rhythm. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, do I work better in a solitary way or do I work better collaboratively? So if you're someone who likes a lot of focus in your work and you like to have total control over what the outputs are, maybe solitary work is something that fits more with your natural motivational style. Or if you're someone who really likes to ping pong ideas off of other people and to work together, on a bigger project and to kind of see things come to fruition with another person, then maybe you're more of a collaborative worker. The next question you can ask yourself is, are you more time-oriented or are you more task-oriented? So do you find it easier to set a particular time window, like in your schedule, and say, okay, I'm going to work on this from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m.? Or do you find it better to be more unstructured and just say, okay, here's this thing on my to-do list and I'm going to work on this thing and just see where I can get to with it? The third question is, am I a more intuitive worker or am I a more structured worker? So am I someone who's able to thrive and be productive if my schedule's a little bit different every single day and I'm sort of have things on a to-do list and I can just pick out which ones I want to work on and I can just kind of feel my way through what it is that I'm doing? Or do I work better when I have my entire schedule all mapped out and I have a whole big strategic plan where it's like, okay, step 1 is this and it's going to go on for this long and then step 2 is that and so on and so on. Another question you can ask is, am I a more type A person where I have a lot of activation energy to really push myself into things and I can be really, really on top of my work? Or am I a more type B person and I'm a little bit more laid back and maybe I need a very low activation energy to enter into the work that I need to do? So for example, I'm a more type B person and I know that if I can kind of oscillate between relaxation and work throughout the day without there being a really strong activation energy needed, and I can just be like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to work on this little thing over here, and oh yeah, I'm just going to chill out for a bit, and then I'm going to work on this thing over here. Now that is by no means an exhaustive list of all the things you can ask yourself to learn more about your motivational rhythm, but it'll start you out on a good foot. And really these questions are meant to help you understand more about your natural motivational currents so that you can surf your own ocean. And so it's a matter of listening more to those bottom-up signals as opposed to those top-down signals. And if you want to learn more about how to do that, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.